Welcome to Rhapsody in 35mm, where we attempt to illuminate the shadows of the past and shine a light on the dark corners of film history. In this introductory season of our podcast, we are going to discuss the history of horror on film. I will discuss where horror elements originated, how the genre developed, and where and how various films were influenced by one another. So come with me on a journey where we trace the development of horror on film. Join me.
If you dare. And away we go.
Good evening. I'm your host, Catherine Goshen. Episode 7, A New World Dawning. This is the third episode in our 6-part series on spiritualism and G.A. Smith, where we explore spiritualism and its role in shaping the horror genre, as well as the life of filmmaker, color film developer, and Society for Psychical Research member G.A. Smith, whose early work as a mesmerist and telepathist informed his later work as a filmmaker. In this episode, we will discuss mesmerism and spiritualism's effect on the horror genre, including the creation of the stage illusion Pepper's Ghost. We will also examine spiritualism's role in scientific and academic research, including its connections to the Society for Psychical Research and the then-nascent field of psychology. In discussing the Society for Psychical Research, we're able to say goodbye to G.A. Smith's time as an employee of the Society as he returns to his theatrical roots and marries Laura Bayley, a performer who was also possibly a filmmaker. As we discussed in Episode 5, a wave of spiritualism swept England and the US, among other countries, during the Victorian-era. Influences ranging from 18th century German physician Franz Mesmer, the American Civil War, the high mortality rate of infants, the development of psychical and psychological practices, and the popularity of Gothic literature and ghost stories from writers like the American Edgar Allan Poe and the Irish Sheridan Fanu, helped to advance interest in spiritualism and the occult. Claims of communicating with the dead, some by genuine believers, many by charlatans, led to an increasing cultural, intellectual, and financial interest in creating avenues to access the spirit world, including spirit photography and psychic demonstrations. The breadth of Victorian society's interest in spiritualism and the occult can be illustrated by the various prominent figures who were early members of the Society for Psychical Research, including Lewis Carroll, Mark Twain, John Ruskin, and Alfred Tennyson. The interest in spiritualism and the occult had a strong impact on the genre of horror. Ghosts, and the ability to communicate with the dead, obviously lent themselves easily to the genre and have been a part of the genre for centuries. But the newly applicable technological aspects of that communication, like spirit photography, which were accomplished through various advances in technology, were able to add new dimensions to the genre. Indeed, spirit photography initially influenced how ghosts were portrayed in the medium of film. Furthermore, this interest translated over to the medium of stage. By the 18th century, science had already merged with the theater, and by the 19th century, scientific demonstrations were popular attractions ripe for a hungry Victorian audience. John Henry Pepper was one of the most popular and important of such demonstrators during this period. While he never made any scientific discoveries of his own, nor published but very few research papers, his natural understanding of exhibition and entertainment allowed him to interpret scientific demonstrations to create a performance of scientific marvel. As Dr. James A. Secord of the University of Cambridge states, quote, "Known today as a pioneering precursor of cinema, Pepper's real significance lay in making the phenomena of physics and chemistry visible and hence accessible throughout the English-speaking world." End quote. Pepper's most enduring legacy is the stage illusion he popularized in the 1860s, which combined science and theater with the Victorian public's interest in spiritualism. Pepper's Ghost, as the illusion came to be known, was invented by Liverpudlian engineer Henry Dircks and announced in 1858 at a meeting for the British Association for the Advancement of Science, though the principles of such a concept had been around since 16th century polymath Giovanni Battista della Porta, discussed it in his 1584 work, Natural Magic. John Henry Pepper, a London-born chemist and lecturer, developed a manner to adapt Henry Dircks' illusion for use on a larger scale. The illusion, as originally performed, involved placing a large plate of glass at a 45-degree angle so that it reflected toward the audience a view of the orchestra pit, where the actor playing the ghost was hiding. To not cast a shadow, and to properly reflect on the glass, the actor playing the ghost had to lie inclined against a black background. Meanwhile, the actors on the stage were performing at the same spatial level in the theater as the audience. According to an article in Scientific American, quote, "When the lights were bright on the main stage and dark below, the reflection of the ghost stayed hidden. But when the lighting above dimmed and grew bright below, the reflection suddenly appeared." End quote. Because these images preserve many of the indicators, like shade, size, and texture, that are used for identification by our visual perception of depth, they can appear to us as three-dimensional. Originally, ghosts were depicted as sitting or reclining due to limitations in the space beneath the stage. The illusion originally premiered on Christmas Eve of 1862 at the Royal Polytechnic Institution in London, during a performance of an adaptation of Charles Dickens's The Haunted Man and the Ghost's Bargain, based on Dickens's fifth and final Christmas novella, with A Christmas Carol having been his first. In the story, Redlaw, a miserly Scrooge-like chemistry teacher, wishes to escape from his painful memories. Haunted by a ghost-like twin of himself, the Phantom offers Redlaw the opportunity to erase his memory. But, according to an article in Scientific American, quote, "Theatergoers attending this particular performance were in for a shock. Instead of confronting the usual flesh-and-bone actor with a sheet over his head, Redlaw faced an incorporeal entity that materialized on stage, apparently out of thin air. Spectators were astonished. The play, which had not been performed in London for more than a decade, became an instant sensation. Enthralled audiences filled the Royal Polytechnic's 500-seat theater for 15 months straight, shelling out £12,000, or the equivalent of more than $2 million today." End quote. While Henry Dircks and John Henry Pepper obtained a joint patent, Pepper retained all financial rights to the illusion. Unsurprisingly, the men's partnership soon ended acrimoniously over issues involving priority and credit. But Pepper did not simply use such scientific inventions for purposes of entertainment. He also sought to educate and illuminate for the Victorian public the science behind such illusions. By explaining how the illusion worked in his public lectures, Pepper was able to provide a critical and educated eye to an age and audience fascinated by spiritualism and the supernatural. And, interestingly, Pepper's Ghost remains an important part of hauntingly amusing entertainments, adapting itself to the 20th and 21st centuries. It has been utilized in films like the 1971 entry in the James Bond canon, Diamonds Are Forever, and Alfred Hitchcock's 1935 film, The 39 Steps. It is also used in popular attractions, one of the most famous being the Disney attraction, The Haunted Mansion. According to Vice magazine, quote, "Using Pepper's technique on a much grander scale, the Disney creative team members installed massive sheets of glass to reflect 2 sets of animatronic ghosts. The first set was installed directly above the audience's heads, and the second set of ghosts was installed directly beneath the audience's feet. Everything besides the ghosts is painted black to ensure that the glass will only reflect the ghosts and not the machinery moving around them." End quote. And as I said, Pepper's Ghost has also been used into the 21st century, because, after all,
Wouldn't you like to be a Pepper too?
For example, in 2012 at the Coachella Valley Music and Arts Festival, Dr. Dre and Snoop Dogg performed on stage with an optical illusion showing the murdered Tupac Shakur. While many thought this illusion to be the result of a 3D hologram, it was actually a 2D image produced through an adaptation of Pepper's Ghost, including the use of a plastic surface angled at the same 45 degrees as described by Pepper and Dirk. Hypnotism, telepathy, and especially mesmerism, with its sexual undertones, also influenced the horror genre. For example, Mary Shelley, in her 1818 novel Frankenstein or the Modern Prometheus, references mesmeric trances multiple times. Indeed, Shelley's husband, Percy Shelley, was mesmerized in 1820 in Pisa to avoid surgery for kidney stones. Before the discovery of ether, mesmerism was often being experimented with by surgeons, such as James Esdale and James Braid, during the early to mid-19th century, and was utilized for its therapeutic and anesthetic benefits. Until the end of the 19th century, hypnotism, evolving from mesmerism, was also used in this manner and as a treatment for psychological issues such as hysteria. Another example of mesmerism's use in horror is Edgar Allan Poe's use of it in multiple stories, including the 1846 horror short story, The Facts in the Case of M. Valdemar, though, according to Dr. Peter Stanbury, a librarian at the Australian Society of Anaesthetists, Poe fails to comprehend mesmerism. And of course, Stoker's 1897 novel, Dracula, firmly established hypnotism and telepathy as part of vampire mythology. In the 2 previous episodes, we discussed the early years of the Society for Psychical Research, including its founding members, Frederic W. H. Myers and Edmund Gurney, the Society's founding member and first president, Henry Sidgwick, and early, influential member, Frank Podmore. As previously discussed, George Albert Smith, the Brighton-based film pioneer, director, and inventor of kinemacolor, began his theatrical career as a mesmerist and telepath, in an act he created and performed with the dubious Douglas Blackburn. While Smith's act was more likely composed of magic tricks and theatrics than genuine psychical phenomena, both he and Blackburn joined the Society for Psychical Research, first in displays of their supposed psychical skill, which were performed for observation and experimentation, then as associate members. Though Blackburn left the Society under mysterious circumstances about a year into his involvement, Smith became closely involved with the Society, becoming the personal secretary to founding member Edmund Gurney and, after Gurney's death, to founding member Frederic W. H. Myers. Beyond his role as secretary, Smith contributed to the Society's experiments and research and co-authored papers for the Society's journal. Spiritualism also increased academic interest in exploring and expanding our understanding of the capabilities of the human mind. The early activities of the Society for Psychical Research, while obviously sometimes lacking in proper scientific skepticism, especially regarding Blackburn and, most likely, Smith, were genuine in its pursuit of scientific and academic studies, applying then-current scientific methods to their research. Much of this work also contributed to the then-nascent field of psychology, including through studies on hypnotism, hallucinations, and disassociation. Indeed, the skepticism the Society applied to its research and its pursuit of exposing psychic frauds caused Sir Arthur Conan Doyle to leave the Society, believing it to be anti-spiritualist. The Society for Psychical Research and the field of psychology were so intertwined that the Society's research was often presented by various members of the Society during the Congress of Experimental Psychology, which was the forerunner to the International Union of Psychological Science. For example, during the first Congress of Experimental Psychology, held in 1889 in Paris, a proposal for a census on hallucinations was taken up as a joint international study by the president of the Society for Psychical Research and utilitarian philosopher Henry Sidgwick, along with the American philosopher William James, who is considered by the American Psychological Association to be one of the most eminent psychologists of the 20th century, and Léon Murillier, who was co-editor of the Revue de l'Histoire des Religions. And, as mentioned in the previous episode, the relationship between the Society for Psychical Research and the Congress of Experimental Psychology grew even more involved the following Congress, which was held in England in 1892. Not only was Henry Sidgwick appointed the second president of the Congress of Experimental Psychology, but Society for Psychical Research founding member Frederic W. H. Myers acted as one of the honorary secretaries of this Congress. Furthermore, among the speakers who presented at this Congress was prominent Society for Psychical Research member Eleanor Balfour Sidgwick, who spoke on thought transference. Indeed, beyond her status as wife of Henry Sidgwick and sister of the future Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, Lord Arthur Balfour, Eleanor Balfour Sidgwick was an academic, administrator, and activist in her own right. Eleanor Sidgwick's work for the Society for Psychical Research included contributing to its research, publishing articles, and presenting findings at academic conferences. As I stated in Part 2, Susan B. Anthony and Elizabeth Cady Stanton wrote in History of Women's Suffrage that spiritualism had provided equal opportunities for women to speak and hold leadership positions. These progressive attitudes regarding women were reflected within the leadership of the Society for Psychical Research. Henry Sidgwick, his brother, the classical scholar of ancient Greek literature, Arthur Sidgwick, and classicist and founding member of the Society for Psychical Research, Frederic W. H. Myers, were all active in advancing the cause of women's higher education and, eventually, promoting the conferral of degrees, with Frederic W. H. Myers stating in his autobiographical sketch, Fragments of Inner Life, that he, quote, resigned his lectureship in 1869 for the purpose of helping to start the new movement for the higher education of women, end quote. But we should be careful in applying terms such as feminism to Eleanor Sidgwick or to the leading members of the Society for Psychical Research. According to the late historian, Dr. Janet Oppenheim, quote, while some feminist historians today acknowledge the difficulties implicit in making certain Victorian women wear a label that these 19th century activists never pinned on themselves, they nonetheless feel compelled to continue employing the categories of feminist and feminism. The matter under debate, however, is not merely whether we should impose categories retroactively, with the possibility of distorting the past by doing so, but what we actually mean when we use these terms. End quote. Like today, the definitions of what feminism means were complicated, and there were many subdivisions within feminism during the Victorian and Edwardian eras of the women's movement, with it breaking into factions such as conservative, relational, socialist, liberal, evangelical, equalitarian, Marxist, relational, and complementarian. According to Dr. Janet Oppenheim, Eleanor Sidgwick was a moderate suffragist, as she believed that women deserved the right to vote and have the power to engage in and affect decisions that involved their lives and futures. Additionally, Sidgwick believed in a woman's right to pursue an education purely for her own needs and pleasure. She also believed in a woman's right to remain unmarried and celibate instead of having to marry and procreate, believing that women should not be forced to marry for reasons of status or money, and that it was better for a woman to never be married than to be in an unhappy marriage. Spinsterhood and a woman's right to remain unmarried and celibate, these are Victorian times after all, were key considerations during the women's movement of the Victorian era. Eleanor Sidgwick was mathematically gifted, assisting her brother-in-law, future winner of the Nobel Prize in Physics, Lord Rayleigh, during the time Lord Rayleigh was Cavendish Professor of Experimental Physics at Cambridge. Supporting Lord Rayleigh in various experiments, including a series of experiments that, quote, definitively redetermined the electrical units of absolute measure, the volt, ohm, and ampere, end quote. Sidgwick's level of contributions to Lord Rayleigh's work was so substantial that she was named as a joint author on 3 important papers published by Lord Rayleigh. Because of her eventual position as principal of Newnham College, a women's college at the University of Cambridge, Sidgwick became a nationally recognized figure in women's education, eventually becoming a member of the Royal Commission on Secondary Education, the president of the Educational Science Section of the British Association for the Advancement of Science, and her appointment by the University of London to its Senate. Nonetheless, Eleanor Sidgwick was unsure if women were as intellectually capable as men, and believed that, even within their intellectual and academic pursuits, women were better suited to assisting, supporting, and nurturing. As she herself stated, quote, even if very few women should prove capable of the greater and more important part of the work of discovery and research, fewer even than the very few men, I have a good hope that women will do excellent work in the subordinate fields of science and learning, will do well much laborious work that needs to be done, though it is not very brilliant or striking, and will in particular prove excellent assistance." End quote. As Dr. Janet Oppenheim concludes regarding Eleanor Sidgwick's legacy, quote, "The documents amassed in Newnham College archives and in Henry Sidgwick's papers at Trinity College make it clear that Mrs. Sidgwick was a woman of independent judgment, to whom her husband frequently deferred, but she so thoroughly downplayed her own contributions to any cause with which she assisted that she has been largely overlooked by the chroniclers of the Victorian and Edwardian women's movement. Unlike some women activists of her generation, Mrs. Sidgwick never articulated what has been called a sustained critique of the gendered order of society. She never gave detailed attention to the issues of women's wages and the economic foundations of their dependence. She certainly wanted to improve the quality of education available to middle and upper-class women. She hoped, thereby, in general terms, to expand their professional opportunities and promote economic self-sufficiency. But the problems of working-class women, and even the difficulties facing university-trained women who sought employment outside the increasingly glutted teaching profession, never attracted her close scrutiny. Accepting the basic structure of gender relations in British society, she assumed that the changes she advocated could be implemented without creating any serious social disturbance. From a late 20th century vantage point, these are blind spots in Eleanor Sidgwick's outlook that help to explain feminist scholars' substantial neglect of Mrs. Sidgwick." End quote. This attitude also seems to be reflected in the work of George Albert Smith. After all, with Smith having been closely involved in the activities of the Society for Psychical Research and remaining an associate member, it would not be surprising if he shared their views. G.A. Smith's wife, Laura Bayley, was a performer and possibly a filmmaker in her own right, though, like much of the work Eleanor Sidgwick did for her husband, the films with which Bayley was involved were credited under her husband's name. It's clear that Bayley was interested in film independent of her husband, as Smith, in an interview in 1899 with the Brighton Herald, comments on Bayley having, quote, "come in to borrow the camera to go off and photograph the waves breaking over the Hove Sea wall," end quote. An entertainer from Brighton, who performed primarily in pantomime and comic revues with her three sisters, Laura Bayley was involved in the production of her husband's films, with her and her sisters often acting as performers in the films. Dr. Frank Gray of the University of Brighton states that Smith's meeting and subsequent marriage to Bayley, quote, placed Smith in contact with an experienced actress who understood visual comedy and the interests of typical seaside audiences, end quote. As you may remember, Bayley was the unfortunate Mary Jane of the dark comedy Mary Jane's Mishap, who blew herself up with paraffin, which we discussed in the first part of Old Dog's New Tricks. Because of her performance in Mary Jane's Mishap, film critic and historian David Robinson argues that Bayley is the first female comedy film star. As mentioned in the previous episode, G.A. Smith had married Laura Bayley shortly before leaving his work at the Society. On Christmas Eve of 1892, the same year that the Second Congress was held in England with Henry Sidgwick as president, Smith announced that he had leased the pleasure garden St. Anne's Well Gardens in Hove, part of the city of Brighton and Hove in East Sussex. Going back to his theatrical roots, Smith operated the pleasure garden, known for its natural beauty, with a fish pond and a large population of gray squirrels, with additional attractions, including swings, seesaws, a monkey house, and a gypsy fortune teller. Indeed, a Mrs. Lee arrived at St. Anne's Well Gardens with her gypsy caravan in the early months of 1891 and stayed for the next 15 years. By 1894, Smith's pleasure and amusement garden had added hot air balloons, parachutists, jugglers, trapeze artists, and magic lantern shows. His magic lantern shows were described as, quote, an exhibition of dissolving views by means of a long-range limelight apparatus, end quote. Limelight is theatrical lighting used in the 19th century, often utilized as a spotlight. According to the Encyclopedia Britannica, limelight is, quote, a popular term for the incandescent calcium oxide light invented by Thomas Drummond in 1816. Drummond's light, which consisted of a block of calcium oxide heated to incandescence in jets of burning oxygen and hydrogen, provided a soft, very brilliant light that could be directed and focused. Its intensity made it useful for spotlighting and for the realistic simulation of effects such as sunlight and moonlight. Limelights placed at the front of the balcony could also be used for general stage illumination. providing a more natural light than footlights. The expression "in the limelight" originally referred to the most desirable acting area on the stage, the front and center, which was brilliantly illuminated by limelights. End quote. Limelights were first used in the theater in the 1830s, but by the end of the 19th century were largely replaced by the electric light, with the electric arc spotlight taking over that specific role. The use of arc lights, which are a form of electric light, and limelight in the operation of magic lanterns allowed for slideshows to increase the size of the viewing audience. According to the Magic Lantern Society of the United States and Canada, quote, equipped with such an illuminant, projectors could display images across relatively large distances, superimpose at almost any rate and level of brightness, and still allow for a precise and highly detailed image, end quote. Changing between lenses to cut from slide to slide allowed Smith to show changes in location, time, and perspective when telling stories through the use of the magic lantern. Limelights were difficult to operate and could be dangerous, with fires and explosions occasionally occurring. Starting at the turn of the 20th century, limelights were gradually replaced by the electric light bulb. However, arc lamps, while modernized, continued to be utilized in some movie projectors. Then, in 1896, as suddenly and unexpectedly as his meeting Douglas Blackburn and being spotted by Frank Podmore of the Society for Psychical Research had altered his life 14 years prior, Smith underwent another life-changing event. He went to the Empire Theatre in Leicester Square, which was exhibiting the first commercial theatrical showings of a projected film in the UK, a program exhibition by the Lumiere brothers. Join us for Episode 8 for the fourth part of this 6-part series on spiritualism and filmmaker G.A. Smith. If you would like a list of sources for this episode, as well as other supplemental material, check out our website at rhapsodyin35mm podcast.com. That's Rhapsody in 35mm podcast.com. When you visit, make sure to subscribe so you can be notified of new episodes and postings. You can also stay connected with us via our social media platforms, such as Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Rhapsodyin35mm. Or drop us a line with any questions or suggestions at rhapsodyin35mm@gmail.com. Please rate us on Apple Podcasts, because that is a great way for others to find us. Rhapsody in 35mm is researched, written, co-produced, and narrated by me, Katherine Goshen. The show is edited and co-produced by Johnny Goshen, who also designed the show logo, website, and takes care of social media. Research assistants are Penny and Sherman Bouts. Until next time, thanks for listening.